Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tate.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
I'm Bob Anthony.
Alan Singer.
Welcome, Dr. Alan Singer, educator, historian, our resident expert on Media Watch. Nothing like having a historian educator amongst a bunch of old, longtime journalists to try to put a perspective on what's going on globally. Show's called Media Watch, brought to you by the good graces of EVT Educational Production, Zoom, and will probably air on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, cable access next Monday, hopefully around 5:30. But we're doing this for Wednesday. I believe it's June 5th, before what would be our normal Monday air date. And June 5th actually is what? The day before the June 6th D-Day anniversary. And so our president is on his way to Europe if he's not already there, because he's going to be celebrating, I believe it's the 80th anniversary of the Normandy invasion on D-Day, the 6th of June, which looms big in the history of democracy and the globe. Alan, as a historian, put that in perspective for us. Would you?
I visited the D-Day site a couple of times just to get a sense of it. And there's also the large manicured cemeteries because of so many soldiers died. One of the things that few people really are aware of is that, well, first, the American Army was racially segregated during World War II. 1,700 Black soldiers participated in the D-Day invasion, but they were in their own battalion. It was called the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. And these were large 35-foot-long balloons that were suspended from the landing craft. And their job was to interfere with German aerial attack. And so about 600 of the 320th were part of the actual assault on the beaches. Many of their balloons were shot down. Mm-hmm. And so a number of the men died just at the start of the attack. Yep. So it's a very good statement about, one, the segregation of the armed forces, but that the African-American men, despite the segregation, played important roles. One of the things they did is they called, we're fighting on two fronts, the democracy abroad and democracy at home.
But Alan, we never see any of those stories about those Black veterans who participated in the D-Day invasion. I've never seen, they don't show up in any movie that I've ever seen Hollywood put out. They don't show up in any of the newsreels about preparations for the D-Day invasion. So these are, and I just saw something on Prime Video that I'm going to screen as soon as possible, and it was erased, big headline, erased, Black veterans of World War II, erased. So they've been erased from history. So I'm glad you brought that up. At least our Media Watch viewers now have some history about the fact that, yeah, there was African-American present soldiers, etc., in a vital role. Can you imagine a balloon? You're a sitting duck in a balloon.
I know, absolutely.
You're a sitting duck. You're not flying in on some fighter, you're not going over on a bomber. You're sitting on a damn almost stationary target trying to draw fire. Just
and if you can't,
for some of the other people making the, that is.
And if you can't hit the balloon, if you can't hit the soldier on the balloon, you can knock the balloon out of the air, killing whoever's on it.
Yeah, right. So,
anyway, targets, man.
We can talk about this, but let's move on to the significance of that, because I told you guys before we started rolling, I saw Heather Cox Richardson had an interesting article about the Marshall Plan. I mean, the role of the U.S. in actually helping to win World War II is well documented. What's been forgotten is the United States bankrolled the recovery of Europe. And Alan, you know about the Marshall Plan as a historian. You could probably fill us in. But without the Marshall Plan, there would have been no post-World War II Europe at all. Please.
So again, what happens is at the end of World War II, you have these two competing superpowers, United States, Soviet Union, who had basically worked together to defeat Nazi Germany. But they weren't friends. And they both were competing for influence in the European recovery. The United States it decided that if Europe was going to be allied with the United States, it would have to redevelop its industries and its economies. Now, what Donald Trump and some others don't understand is this actually benefits American industry as well. The United States does not give money to other countries. What the United States does is it gives these countries credits to buy American manufactured goods. So the United States redevelops Western Europe, but at the same time, the United States builds up its own global economy. Sure. Yeah. But it uses the Marshall Plan to cement alliances that eventually become NATO and North American Treaty Organization, which the United States uses to come into loggerheads with the Soviet Union, which is now Russia.
So we know.
So you're saying, Alan, that the Germany that we know today, in terms of their engineering expertise, their car manufacturing, wouldn't be possible had we not at least set the foundation for the rebuilding of all of that.
That's a very good point, Bob.
Yeah.
Germany was always noted for its engineering excellence. I mean, Mercedes predates the war. Mm-hmm. A lot of technological development comes out of Germany. However, their industry was destroyed by the intensive bombing, and that's what the United States helps to rebuild.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the same story with Japan?
Slightly different, but pretty much, yeah. We basically helped the Japanese get back on their feet and that's because MacArthur and I guess Truman, before he fired MacArthur, basically made the Japanese promise never ever to become a warmongering nation again. They put it in the peace treaty or whatever the thing was, that they could not have a standing army. There was a whole bunch of stuff, but they also helped rebuild the Japanese industry, if memory serves me correct, Alan.
Well, again, the key confrontation point with the Soviet Union was Western Europe.
Right.
And Japan was really a secondary front during the war and a secondary front in the post-war era. Mm-hmm. You know, Europe rebuilt its industries. Japan started off with very low-level manufacturing. You know, companies like Honda, and I'm not sure about Toyota, start off with motorbikes and motorcycles and then expand out. I mean, that was very much Japanese management and ingenuity, more so, I think, than U.S. contribution. But again, I'm not positive.
My first transistor radio in the 50s was Japanese made. You know, not German made, but Japanese made.
The push on those post-war things was to try to get those folks into a more democratic frame of mind for governance.
No, sure.
So the Europeans had been at war with each other, Germany fighting France, Germany fighting Poland, all those there was nothing but wars on the continent of Europe from the 19th century right into the early 20th century where they were fighting each other. Prussian secession, Austria-Prussian war, there were a gazillion wars. Those people were always at war with each other. What Marshall decided was to get those people to come together in an economic alliance that was geared and underpinned by a push towards democratic forms of government. He did not want another Nazi autocratic kind of government. He did not want what the Soviets were pushing, a communist form of government. And so he said, let's build their economy. Let's give them the tools to set democratic governments in place, and we'll help underpin it, and to the tune of 17 billion. I forget what the actual figure was, but we spent a lot of money shoring up that economy. Selfishly, Alan can correct me, but the bottom line was they were trying to avoid another global recession, which had preceded. The world had gone through Our depression, that was not just in the United States. That was a global global recession. Our depression was part of a global recession. Marshall had the foresight, and the US government had the smarts to listen to him. And so they underwrote all that stuff to push back at these autocratic regimes that had been burgeoning when World War II broke out. Fascism in Spain, fascism in Italy, not autocrat, not Nazi Germany dispensing with their democratic form of government, and then Stalin trying to take the Soviet bloc into an autocratic one-man rule kind of government. And it worked. They had what somebody probably already coined the phrase, a Pax Americana that grew out of the Marshall Plan. They successfully rebuilt Europe and pushed back against those traitors. But now there's a war in Europe because and those autocratic dictators is what I'm saying, because the autocratic dictator in Russia decides he wants to remake the map of Europe and take over other people's country. And so he's invading Ukraine. Fortunately, that Pax Americana Democratic Coalition that became NATO, as Alan said, has been shoring up Ukraine. Good thing Joe Biden's in office right now, because the guy that he defeated didn't want to give Ukraine the money, was in bed with Putin, and is still trying to get in bed with Putin and autocrats across the globe. Mr. Trump, the former president, who is now a convicted felon, okay? And that's the guy that we would be dealing with had he gotten elected in the last election. Still claiming that he won. Now he's got a Supreme Court that might actually say, oh, presidents have immunity, and that's what we got to worry about, because they want to take the New York conviction and send it to the Supreme Court. Mike Johnson said, U.S. Supreme Court must take a look at this, echoed by Donald, 34 felon count convicted. The U.S. Supreme Court's got to take a look at this. Well, guess what? There is no legal peg for the federal government to do anything with that New York conviction. They got to dig real deep to come up with something, and I don't see them coming up with it, but I could be wrong. But
the fact is they know that. They know there's no legal route to the Supreme Court from a conviction in New York State. They know that, but they want to find some way, some backwards federal...
A stalling tactic. It's another stalling tactic.
Yeah, well, how about obfuscation tactic? Because what did that government oversight committee, who was it? Bob? Ray, you were talking about the Fauci...
The Fauci thing, yeah. That was just a diversion. I mean, they were going at him. I couldn't believe the attack that he was receiving. I mean, especially Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was unrelenting. And everybody, all of the Republicans were like, they speak loud and fast, which makes you believe that they're telling the truth.
Really? Why? Just because they speak loud?
Why? Because if that's the way it works. If you scream and yell, people who believe anything that you say are going to believe you even more, because you must be righteous. You haven't seen that? I mean, I've seen that all my life.
Okay.
Does anybody else agree with me on that?
Well, I mean, if you're loud and passionate and if you're the type of voter who doesn't pay attention, you see that little clip, and all of a sudden you're convinced, oh, this guy must have something. And so I get that. Yeah. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, as I said before we started,
she is loud and loud.
Yes. I didn't think she could bottom out further, but she found a way.
It's even worse. They're not interested in truth, and they weren't really interested in Fauci's responses.
No.
What they're interested in is having a soundbite that can play on right-wing media, and they could use in their reelection.
And he didn't fall for it.
Precisely, Alan. You nailed it. They needed a soundbite for their campaigns.
Yeah. So bottom line is 34 counts, guilty on all 34. Now, every one of those leaders in the Republican Party bent over backwards. You remember when, before the conviction, Tim Scott was asked on Meet the Press or one of those Sunday morning shows, will you accept the election results if he's a convicted felon and blah, blah, blah. He says, I expect him to be, he wouldn't say yes or no, okay? Now he comes out loud and bullhorn. The justice system is now corrupt, blah, 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 blah. It's a fix. Whatever the quotes were, Tim Scott was one of the loudest trumpeters of saying this was a fixed trial. And a former Trump attorney actually had to push back. I forget the guy's name. I don't know. I don't know if you got that link, but the former Trump attorney said, I don't know what he's talking about. Jury of this man's peers actually weighed the evidence, took a look at what was going on and said, no, yeah. He was
Joe Tacopina. Wasn't that his? Yeah, that's the guy.
Well,
former Trump attorney.
Appeal claiming it wasn't really a jury of his peers because none of them were billionaires.
Yeah. No. Well, pretend billionaires, whatever.
Yes. But with Tim Scott, I mean, he knows exactly how a jury system works. He knows how the attorneys pick the jurors. He knows the entire routine. Yet he comes out with a statement that uses the word hoax. I don't know, it looked like 30 times. It's below. Well, here again, I didn't think that Tim Scott could bottom out worse than he's done in the past, but here he goes again.
Well, he's the presumptive vice president candidate.
Not yet, but he's angling for that.
He's a wannabe. That's why
he's a wannabe. Okay, I thought Trump already endorsed him, but
Alan, you had a couple of other things about the reaction to this guilty verdict that I think you wanted to at least tick off.
Well, again, what's frightening is the attack on the legal system. That
frightening
no one disputed, first of all, what Trump did. You know, Trump said, "Oh, I didn't have sex with that woman," and what his attorneys did is by challenging the woman, she gave a very graphic description of everything that took place. The thing is, having the relationship with the woman is an embarrassment because he was married at the time. It makes a statement about his morals and his judgment, but he was actually convicted. The crime was that he used fraud to report the payments to the woman, and he did that to impact on the election.
Falsifying business records to commit another crime, which was to get reelected under false pretenses of being an upright, moral person.
If he had just falsified the business records because he didn't want his wife to know, he would not have been convicted of the felonies. If he wasn't an idiot, he could have said, look, I did have a relationship with a woman. I'm embarrassed. I was married. This had nothing to do with the election. This had to do with my wife. And he would have been acquitted. But because he argued that none of this happened, it opened up the whole kettle of worms. It made it possible for the prosecutors to look at how he used this to silence the media as part of his election campaign. And that's what made it a felony. Made it 34 felonies.
Yep, convicted on all 34. So
and
now,
the prosecution was intelligent because they knew that contrition wasn't part of Trump's DNA.
You're right.
So speaking of, because I don't want him to gobble up all the air in the room. Now they're actually looking to see what's going to happen because President Biden's son is now on trial because of a charge that a lot of legal experts say had he not been the son of the president, the plea deal that was worked out probably would have worked because he may or may not have known that he incorrectly said the wrong thing on the form that he filled out. So he's going to jail for maybe not knowing the right frame of mind, or maybe he was in rehab so that because he was in rehab, he could say, I'm not a drug user, whatever. There's all kinds of legal maneuvers that are going to be taken care of in this court, in this trial. But right now, what was that you were talking about? Which right-wing media arm when they first opened up their newscast? Quote that for us, for our viewers.
Which?
The the president's son is being tried. What was the quote?
Well, I don't know. I don't remember what the quote was, but I will say that if Biden has the power, the judicial power to influence court decisions to convict Trump, well, he can easily get his son off then, right?
Well, actually, good point in that, because this is a federal charge I think they're getting on.
Yeah.
So if Joe Biden wanted to be right-wing MAGA as far as the judiciary system,
he has no power to do that.
Wait and see if his son gets off. If his son gets off, he doesn't do a thing. If his son gets convicted, he said, yeah, okay, fine. He was not in his right mind. He was a bad kid with bad influence. I'm going to pardon him. And he could do that if he wanted to. What you're seeing is Joe Biden say, I'm the president. That's my son. I ain't saying anything about the judiciary system while he's on trial. As a father, I love him. I want the best for him. We'll see what happens. So far, pretty much, I'm paraphrasing what his statement has been. But what has the right-wing media been saying? Somebody had a quote about some organization talking about, well, Biden's son's going to be tried now. What will the left-wing media have to do about that trial? Will they cover it? Like, what was that quote?
Well, go ahead.
No, it was something about how will the left-wing media cover it. I don't remember the actual quote. I'm sorry.
But I remember when Trump was convicted, I remember the outlets like Newsmax and OAN coming out right away saying that, we've been all over this because, they covered the Trump case, basically gavel to gavel. And they said, well, never mind the 34 convictions. Let's see how they cover the Hunter Biden case. That was their important news hook for that afternoon. Never mind this past president was convicted. So, it just shows how. Go ahead, Alan.
I just don't understand. Donald Trump was president of the United States. He's running for president of the United States. I don't think Hunter Biden is anybody.
He's not. He's the president's son, though. So, if you can besmirch him, that's staying on the president.
Alan, remember they were trying to impeach Joe Biden, the current president, claiming that Joe Biden had benefited from his son's business activity. Yeah. Now, they spent a lot of taxpayers' dollars doing all kinds of digging to find where and how often and how much Joe Biden had profited from his son's business dealing. And they came up with
zero.
No grounds for any impeachment. We haven't heard much about impeach Joe Biden lately, have we? Because 34 charges pushed impeach Joe Biden off the radar. And now that the 34 charges have in the conviction of Donald Trump, now let's see what they're going to do about, let's get Hunter Biden convicted. That's going to be the next push. But
he might get convicted on those gun charges.
He might get convicted on it, or he might not. It all depends. But whatever happens, if he doesn't get convicted, they're going to say, "Oh yes, it's the corrupt justice."
Right, of course.
And if he's convicted, who knows what they're going to say? Okay.
I know we have a couple of other items to talk about. We have about like 4 minutes left.
Oh.
So, Eric, why don't we do that breaking news story?
Yeah. So talk about people manipulating news and trying to influence other people. Which outfit first broke it, Alan? Israeli newspaper first broke this, and then the New York Times picked it up.
I saw it on Haaretz, which was an Israeli paper, but there was also something called Middle East Watch. There in Israel, there are anti-Netanyahu groups which are constantly monitoring what the government is doing, and they released it. But
tell our viewers what the story is.
Well, it now turns out that since October 7th, since the Hamas attack on Israel, what Israel has been doing is it's creating phony news sites and phony avatars, which are flooding the social media with pro-Israel propaganda. Now, one of the things they've been doing is they've been targeting leading African-American elected officials, Hakeem Jeffries and Richie Torres, both from New York City, to get them to support whatever Netanyahu and Israel are doing in Gaza. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's a connection, but Torres and Jeffries are also major recipients of donations from the major Israeli lobby group, AIPAC. So what we have, a political action committee, not a lobby group. So what they've been doing is using social media to influence American government and again, phony news stories. They've been making up avatars who claim to be Americans, and it's
same kind of propaganda push that the Chinese and the Russians have been doing, trying to influence U.S. thinking, U.S. policy. The Israeli government did that. Now, why am I not surprised that that happened? Because the Israelis had a spy spying for them against us umpteen years ago that got thrown in jail. And we kept him in jail despite a whole bunch of people saying, we need to release him. I said, why? He was spying against us, just like our supposed friend was spying on us. He gets prosecuted just like everybody else does. Took some negotiation. They finally let him out. But
Alan, I read that article just before. I'm
surprised that they would do a propaganda campaign to shore up their position. It looks like we're picking on Israel, but we don't do their behavior. They're the ones doing this kind of behavior. We're just reporting what the media is reporting. And this is another story about Israeli propaganda trying to shore up and whitewash their behavior in Gaza.
And we have about 30 seconds left.
Alan, I read this article just before we went on air. Aren't those avatars that they're using basically 90% African American?
And they're AI created.
Yeah,
all fake.
AI created, right?
Okay. By the way, we're out of time. This has been Media Watch, folks. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
Alan Singer.
And I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And we'll catch you the next time, folks. Stay safe.